We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Monday edition of Free Association Radio. This is Robert Phoenix, and the moon is in Libra, and God is within you. This is how these things work. The two are not mutually exclusive of one another. So with that in mind, let's try to bring some balance into our lives today here on the first day of the week, pointing towards the end of the month of March. We are now officially in the sign of Aries, and all things are moving forward. That includes the possible assassination and death of one Bashar al-Assad, who is the president of Syria, and reports overnight are that he was shot by one of his bodyguards, and it's murky right now. News out of Syria, obviously, is quite mixed, and there's a lot of chaos that is surrounding this event. What we do know is we have not seen Assad. He has not come out and said that he's okay. One of two scenarios has occurred. He's either been shot and has been killed, or he's been shot and is in critical condition, and they're trying to keep him alive. Now, this has major reverberations on the global front. And what I believe occurred is probably somebody got to one of his bodyguards and offered the bodyguard the deal of a lifetime. The bodyguard, it's interesting because here we are, this is Passover, we're coming up on Good Friday, and of course the crucifixion of one Jesus Christ, a.k.a. Sananda Emmanuel Yeshua. And what we have here is a Judas-like act in the form and the guise of Assad's bodyguard, a.k.a. the Judas kiss, which would be bullets, in this case, to Assad, and who knows what was promised to that bodyguard. I highly doubt that this was an ideological act of defiance and revolution on the bodyguard's part. Although not knowing the bodyguard and not trying to assume anything, that may not be the case. But let us assume for a moment that it is not, and he was swayed by what could be and what might be and what lies ahead for him and his family for the next 2 generations to come as a result of this act of potential treason. So we have a void now which is taking place in Syria, and right next to it, off the coast of Syria, not very far away, the island of Cyprus about to strike a deal with the EU, and that deal is that any deposit over 100,000 euros will essentially be frozen and subject to a lien that would support the debt and the loan that Cyprus is about to receive from the European Union. This is pretty significant. If you have more than 100,000 euros, in a Cyprus account, you're fucked. Luckily, and I think this is what happened, I think the British Crown got involved. There are a number of Brits, expats living in Cyprus, living fairly cheaply, I might add. It's a lot less expensive in Cyprus. It's warmer than it is in Britain. They get a pretty good rate in their savings, and they're probably somewhere down below the 100,000 euro mark. So they're going to be okay. But everyone else with 100,000 pounds or more, or 100,000 euros or more, hello, Russian oligarchs, you're in trouble, because the EU is going to be taking your money. How much of your money? We don't know. You probably don't know. But let's just assume that it's going to be less than you had before all this went down. Now, if we look back as to what's happened just over the course of the last few weeks, there's a Russian oligarch named Berezovsky who died. He had a heart attack. This is big news. This is very big news. This would be like, if, to some extent, if Warren Buffett just keeled over. Now, I'm assuming that Berezovsky and some of his pals had money in these Cypriot banks. And maybe Berezovsky had more money than anyone else. I don't know. I'm just putting some pieces together that look fairly suspicious to me on the surface. So here we have a major portion of the world is changing before our very eyes right now with the death of Bashar al-Assad, if indeed that's the case, and the seizure of funds in Cyprus. Both of these countries, at one point in time, were outposts of the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar had their headquarters, their beachhead in the Middle East in Tartus, which is the port city of Syria. Very important city. It literally is a staging area for anything that's going to take place in the Middle East. So if there is going to be a war with Iran, then Syria and Tartus would be a significant area to retain some control over. Now, there in Tartus, the Knights Templar had their headquarters. They actually, I think at one point in time, they ran Syria. And then they were eventually run out. And where did they go? They went to Cyprus. And they were in Cyprus for a while, then they were eventually run out of Cyprus. So the Knights Templar have had their fingerprints on both places. And what do we know about the Knights Templar? They were involved in two things, two major things: war, conquest, right? They were the force behind the Crusades. They were the group that ensconced themselves in Jerusalem and theoretically found the remnants of something very important beneath the Temple of Solomon. Okay? Now, some people believe that they found Baphomet, which allowed them to contact deities, extra-dimensional deities, demons, have you, and get information. Some people believe that they found some very interesting artifacts that would indicate that Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene had a child. And out of that child thus spawns the Merovingian bloodline. Now, the Merovingian bloodline goes back in time to the Merovingians, who basically ran France. But this is another kind of adjunct of the Merovingian bloodline. This would be the Mary bloodline. So out of this now comes this whole potential of a bloodline which contains the blood of Jesus. Now, if they knew this, they would have the power over the Catholic Church, who at that time was pushing a very different story and a very different agenda. So that's one aspect of the Knights Templar. Very important to understand that. The other aspect of the Knights Templar is they became the first group in Europe that was involved in banking. So if you were living in the south of France, if you were living in the Albigensian region, and you wanted to travel to, say, Paris, well, sometimes traveling with money was a tricky adventure. You didn't always want to travel with money. If you traveled with money, you could get hijacked on the road to Paris, and then you would lose your money. So then the only thing you could do is, if you really want to travel, So you'd have to hire people to travel with you, which costs money. You would have to have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people travel with you so you can fend off any kind of attack or any kind of thievery that would await you. But there was a solution. The solution was in the hands of the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar would take your money in, say, the south of France, and they would write you a certificate. And upon arrival in Paris, you would take that certificate to another location, and then they would give you that money in Paris. They were like traveler's checks. But then the Knights Templar got into other things. They got into interest-based lending. They became a very, very powerful entity, which were eventually wiped out by Pope Innocent II, I believe. And it was on a Friday the 13th, October Friday the 13th. So what happened was that they got way too much power. They held power over the Catholic Church because they had documents that they were basically extorting the Catholic Church. They were getting payments from the Catholic Church because they had the goods on the Catholic Church. That's one thing they did. The other thing that they did is they were accruing power in terms of lending. So if you were a monarch in Western Europe and one of your rivals was getting money from the Knights Templar, you didn't like that because they could form an army, they could pay an army, they could take you down, they could extend their boundaries. So they were a threat. They were a threat to any of the emerging monarchies at that time. They were essentially wiped out. Of course, they weren't entirely wiped out, as some of them migrated to Scotland, and then we have the whole beginnings of what we would call Freemasonry or the Rosicrucians, the Order of the Rosy Cross, which takes place at Rosalind Chapel in Scotland. So it's a very interesting time, and what we're seeing here with Syria and we're seeing with Cyprus, these were two strongholds at one point of the Knights Templar. And what are we talking about? We're talking about banking, and we're talking about geopolitical power and conquest. So these are very interesting times, and we've got to keep our eyes now. We've got to stay really aware as to what's going to take place, especially in Syria. Now, I don't think there's any mistake, by the way, that the President of the United States just met with officials in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and on the heels of that, essentially, Assad was taken out. I think that there was a high-ranking decision that was made, and action took place, and they got to one of the guards, and they were going to deal with the repercussions because there was a war at that time. It's a war that they were spending a lot of money on the war in Syria, and I'm not sure they could have won the war in Syria. Now, the repercussions, again, are really, really important. Keep in mind, one of Syria's great allies are the Russians. Keep in mind that the country that had a lot of money in those banks in Cyprus, maybe not the country itself, but very powerful people within Russia are the oligarchs. The Russian mafia has money in those banks in Cyprus. So quickly, what we've seen here is we've seen potentially two blows against the former Soviet Union. If you believe that these things are happening as a result of some kind of conflict going on and not just stage theater for you and I to sit back and witness and then begin to comment on, become afraid of, you know the story. Somewhere in the middle is the truth. There's something going on. There is a war taking place now. These two events are related. Cyprus and Syria are related. And the people that are being affected the most are the Russians. So keep your eyes on this area. It's going to be very, very important to watch over the next few days and weeks, because there could be some form of retribution as a result of this. We shall see. It's going to be very interesting to see how the people of Syria respond as well. We live in absolutely fascinating, earth-shattering times. The forces of the planet, the geopolitical forces of the planet are shifting right before our very eyes. 2 weeks ago, it was Hugo Chavez who died of cancer. This week it's Assad. These are two very important countries because they were sovereign, they were debt-free, and now there is a vacuum, a void, a leadership vacuum and a leadership void, and in which case people can be inserted into those governments who will now be much more compliant with what we would call the New World Order or the emerging New World Order. Very important. I cannot stress how important these events are because there's only one or two more countries now that are on the checklist. One of them is North Korea, and you see what's happening with North Korea. It's insane. They're threatening to go to war with the United States. And they've got a scenario where they take 150,000 people captive. And if indeed North Korea is a rogue nation, and it might be, then that would bear watching. Because they've got nothing to lose. They've got nothing. They've got what they do have is they are being sanctioned. They've got sanctions, so they're not getting any food. They don't grow anything anyway. I mean, that's a poor country. Those people have been living on rice and whatever else they can get since the end of the Korean War. So what do they have to lose? So we've got North Korea. They're on the outside. And the other country on the outside is Iran. And that's the biggie. That is the biggie. And some people believe that the Syria domino had to fall before Iran. So what we're seeing now is a fast-track blitzkrieg to bring as many countries into what we would call the New World Order. Anybody that's sovereign, anybody that's debt-free, they cannot be allowed to stand alone. This is where it's at now. I had a very interesting weekend, just in case you were all wondering. By the way, today's show is 2 hours. I don't know if you noticed that, but if you're listening, it's a 2-hour show. In the second hour, I'm going to play an interview that I just did with Charles Friith live. Well, it's not going to be live for you. It was live for me. From Thailand, and it's a great interview. And Charles and I talk a little bit about Syria and Cyprus, but we talk a lot about Nicholas Roerich, the Rite of Spring, FDR, and this whole and the fallout that existed from the relationship between Roerich and Henry Wallace, the end of FDR, the beginning of Harry Truman, the Korean War. It's 60 minutes of really interesting dot connecting. So please stay in touch with the show over the course of the entire 2 hours and listen to the second hour. It's worth listening to. Over the weekend, excuse me, I have a little bit of a what do they call it? A feather in the throat? Not a feather in the cap. I had a good weekend. And it was an interesting weekend. I'll just share with you some pieces from the front here. My son plays Little League Baseball. And when we were living in California, he really enjoyed it. And he was getting pretty good at it, too. And we came here to Texas, which is where we're now living, and he signed up for Little League again. And when he signed up, he was only 8 years old. He just turned 9. And they have I didn't know this at the time, but they have two divisions in his age group, the upper division and then the lower division. And the upper division is for players that are generally closer to 10 or 10. The league ends at 10. And players who are good. They can be younger, but if they're good, they'll get drafted. Then all the rest kind of sift down to the lower division of younger players or players that aren't that skilled. So my son winds up in the upper division. I'm thinking, great. I've got a kid that can play. This is fantastic. He's been recognized for his being able to play. Good stuff. Well, what happened was he got drafted onto a team that had 6 core players from the year before. So all these kids knew each other. And they were good. They played together as a team. They grew. Some of them are coaches' sons. And they have a very unique relationship. Coaches' sons are different kids, okay, because they believe that they're the coaches' sons. that they have more power than they actually do. Some of them can play. The kids on this team, they can play a little bit. But what I found is one of the coach's sons has created a little inner circle. You got to realize these are kids are 9 and 10 years old, and I'm seeing the formation. I've never seen this before, but I'm seeing the formation of socialization take place right before me. Exclusionary tactics. This circle is unique. This is an elite circle, and you're outside of our elite circle. And I watch this with this kid. You know, he'll do it by targeting other individuals and demeaning them, while including other individuals and praising them in his own little world. Fascinating stuff. Absolutely fascinating. And it has an effect on the other kids. So my kid's the new kid, and he's good, but he's not as good as these other kids who are older and been playing more than he has. And so what happened is that they've targeted him and they put him outside the circle. And I've watched this. I watched it on Saturday. And it's like, I'm not really crazy about it, but I'm seeing this firsthand. And my kid tells me so-and-so is being bossy. Well, that's code for me to say that so-and-so is being an asshole. And I didn't really quite know what he was talking about until I sat in the stands with the kids before the game and watched it all take place. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how psychopaths are born. This is how it's born. It starts at a really early age. It starts when somebody believes they're more special than they are. And then it starts very quickly by learning and understanding social tactics. And those social tactics are about exclusion, excluding one group in favor of another, and a very small elite group at that. And from that experience, that person then draws power. It's fascinating to watch. And I watched it. I watched it all happen on Saturday. And quite frankly, I was disgusted. I was disgusted by this little shit. And then I realized, well, where does this come from? Well, it comes from his father. Guess what? His father's one of the coaches. And his father, I got to tell you, not a fan. Just, maybe they'll listen to my show. I don't care. I don't think they will. Not a fan. So it's interesting. It's interesting to watch all of this unfold. And so I told my kid, well, hey, bond with some of the other kids, some of the other outsider kids. And that's what he's been doing. So this whole dynamic of watching socialization take place, utterly fascinating. And I just, because for me, it reflects back on my own childhood, because I was like him when I was a kid. I was much more extreme, though. I was way more extreme. I was cordoned off and hazmated by my peers as a kid. He's a lot more accessible in many ways, and it's a shame that they're cutting him out, because he's actually a really good kid and a lot of fun, and that's their loss. Oh, by the way, they played a game on Saturday. Guess what the score was? 11-11. It was a tie game. 11-11. I don't make this stuff up. Okay, so what I want to do now is do I want to play the Charles? Maybe I'll play Charles in the second part of the show. I'm just wondering if there's anything else I need to go over in terms of news. I guess the only other thing I wanted to go over in terms of news was I posted something on the site about Roerich. We talked about Roerich last week. Nicholas Roerich, the man behind the symbols of the dollar bill and the Pentagon, the esoteric genius and agent provocateur that infiltrated the White House during the FDR administration. And Sandra Sinar, who is a really good Facebook friend, told me on the post that I put up on Astrology for the Now Age, which you can find on Facebook, is that the Roerich building, there's an actual building in New York City that was built for Nicholas Roerich, okay? And this is where a lot of the esoteric stuff went down. This is where the channelings went down. It was a pretty happy, they called it the Master Building, all right? The Master Building. She told me that this was where they filmed Ghostbusters. And I just smacked my hand against my head. And Sandra made another great connection in that if you look at the character, the woman played by Sigourney Weaver in Ghostbusters, she's actually very similar to the woman who is chosen in the Rite of Spring. In the Rite of Spring, there's a maiden who is chosen by fate to take on, she's almost like a psychopomp. She's chosen to take on a spirit and to channel that spirit and then literally dance herself to death and release the spirit into the collectivity of the tribe, at the center of which, by the way, are the wise men or the tribal elders who would then take on the energy, the commingled and hybridized energy of the woman and the spirit being unleashed into the tribe and into them. So this is all really sort of death cult, Babylonian ritualistic magic. Same thing happens in Ghostbusters, where Sigourney Weaver becomes this vessel, and she becomes possessed. Now, when I saw Ghostbusters, I think it was 22 or 23. I was really at the peak of my esoteric awakening. I was seeing auras right and left. I was leaving my body. I was having these amazing psychic experiences with people, or knocking my socks off. I was really sensitive. I was very aware. I was working with autistic children at the time. It was very interesting. So I went and saw Ghostbusters. Everybody's laughing. I'm horrified. I don't know I'm thinking, what the hell's wrong with me? Everybody's getting a really good rise out of this. And I think there's something else going on here that I'm not really keen about. I remember leaving the theater after watching Ghostbusters feeling traumatized. And I tried to explain this to a friend of mine who I saw the movie with, and he must have thought I was just nuts. At that time, I believed that there was a ritual taking place, that they were hijacking symbols, they were doing all these things, and they were giving it to people under the aegis of comedy. Meanwhile, they were really hijacking people's minds and inserting them with this sort of demonic force. Because when people laugh, you see, when people let go of themselves, if they laugh, if they are in pain, even to the point where sometimes the sex act will open them, things will be inserted. You're not looking the other way, right? It's as you're looking the other way, and the back door opens. You leave that theater, all the imagery, all the symbolism, all of the dark magic that was stirred up during Ghostbusters is inserted right into your consciousness. And people laughed. They thought it was really funny. Anyway, I'm going to do more on this. I'm definitely going to do more on Sigourney Weaver. Trust me. Very interesting in terms of what I call the Cinematrix. Very interesting figure. More. Hopefully by today or tomorrow. I'm going to try to do a piece on the full moon today. I've got to do more on my astrology site. A little bit of housekeeping. So people know that I'm here in Austin. I'm in a very interesting place in my life. My lease runs out in about 2 months. And after that, I don't necessarily know where I'm going to be. In my life, I'm waiting for the invitation. That's what I have to do. I'm a projector. I'm waiting for the invitation. I would like to stay here in Austin. That would be my first choice. But I'm also open to invitations. So I'm putting that out there to any of you. I'm going to have 2 months. I'm going to have 1 month of my time where I'm absolutely and utterly free. And possibly maybe longer than that if the right invitation comes through. So there you go. I'm extending the invitation to invite me. All right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play some music. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to upload this file because I literally ended my conversation with Charles and then started the show. So I have the file here, and it's almost always better if I upload it through Blog Talk versus just playing it on my computer. So let me see if I can find a piece of music here that will keep you entertained and relatively enlightened while I upload this file. Let me see if I can find some more Man Called Clay. What do we have here from Man Called Clay? We have Umek, which is 4 minutes and 52 seconds. Why don't we go with Man Called Clay? I'll play this again. This is from his new album, Bringing, I-N-G, capital at the end. The track is Umek, and let's hope that I can upload this track in the next, this file. If not, I'll just play it live from my computer, and we'll deal with the audio quality from there. All right, Man Called Clay, Umek. I'll see you in about 5 minutes. The beauties of synchronicity, something Charles and I will be talking about here in the upcoming interview. The piece of music just finished, and the file has been uploaded, and now it is in processing mode. So we're just waiting here to get the last links from the file up to Blog Talk, so we can hear this with as much clarity as possible. And we're almost there. We're about 3/4 of the way through. Weather here in Austin, just to give you an update, I tell you, the extremes in weather over the last 48 hours have been mind-blowing. So Saturday morning, it was cold. I mean, I know people in the East are getting snow, and it's April. I'm sure they're just tired as hell of that. So I'm not complaining. But I'm just telling you that it was cold, really cold, and damp. Drizzly cold, in your bones kind of cold. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it was 80 degrees and sunny. Fast forward to Sunday morning, low 50s, high 40s with 25 mile per hour winds. Just insane weather shifts here in South Central Texas. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to play the interview with Mr. Charles Friith. Again, setting the stage for this, it happened really just about 2 hours ago. Me here in Texas, Charles in Thailand, both places known for hot weather and hot food. And Charles is the pundit of punk planning. You can look Charles up on the internet with his website. I urge you to follow Charles on Twitter because Charles is a machine, and he's like a news wire unto himself on Twitter. He's got over 3,000 followers, and there's no doubt as to why they follow him. He brings lots of information. So this is Charles and I from earlier this morning, and we're talking about Nicholas Roerich, the Rite of Spring, FDR, and the current situations in Syria and Cyprus, amongst many other things. I'll see you in about 59 minutes, roughly. You're listening to the Monday Mashup. I'm Robert Phoenix.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
Well, that's not Charles, is it? All right, here we go. Glitchville Mania, once again. Lovely. Refreshing the screen. Come on, Blog Talk. Give me that button. I just love it when this stuff happens. All right, here we go. Let's try this one more time. Charles Friith from Thailand. Okay, so last week I tried to bring Charles Friith, who is one of my absolute favorite tweeters. I call him a serial tweeter, and also a very fine blogger who is really on the cutting edge of intelligence warfare, and it's something he calls punk planning. Tried to bring him on the show last week, and we encountered, I was the one who encountered some serious technical glitches in terms of recording him in the show. Thank you very much, Bill Gates and Skype. So we decided to do this offline and then bring it back here, circle back on Monday. So here he is, straight from sweltering Bangkok, our good friend Charles Friith. How's it going, Charles?
Oh, it's great to talk to you, Robert. Really enjoy what you're doing. It's just great to have stuff that kind of triggers, that kind of like provokes, and also, as I've mentioned, there's been some great synchronicity on the stuff that you're researching from a completely different angle, but very obscure names in the official history or the orthodox history of the planet. And I was like, wow, this is really ringing the synchronicity bell. So that's why I'm very excited. That, as I mentioned to you, I don't think synchronicities are a sign that the right path is being crossed.
It's a sign that the Matrix might actually be supporting us versus subverting us. So let's get into what we originally had decided that we were going to talk about, which was a post that I did and a show I did last week on Nicholas Roerich, The Rite of Spring, and one Henry Wallace, and that apparently really triggered something in you about what you've been poking around with Wallace on. So why don't we start from there, and let's just get into what piqued your interest about that.
Okay, I'm a huge FDR fan, and I understand that he's so divisive for many people, but, I just say, look, just get rid of that left-right stuff. You all know a bit of left sometimes works, a bit of right sometimes works. Shenzhen is a special economic region in China that kicks off China's capitalism. So, you can mix and match stuff, but forget that stuff for a moment. FDR is a really interesting guy because on the surface, if you kind of lean to the left or whatever, you've got to say this guy seems to love his country and love his people. But then if you look at other decisions like Pearl Harbor and the dollar bill and the Pentagon building, wow, suddenly you're into Masonic lands and symbolism and stuff like that. So for me, it was always very confusing. I want to like this guy, but I don't feel comfortable about this stuff, and so on and so forth. And then when I was watching Oliver Stone's history, Hidden Forbidden History or whatever, I was introduced to this character, or his vice president, Henry Wallace. And I was just staggered that this vice president had all the characteristics of a person who wanted to do, really authentic things for his country. He struck me as the kind of person who wasn't in politics, power, and all that kind of stuff. He was, studied languages in his spare time. He was an agricultural specialist, scientist in many respects. And so he had proper policies for commerce, for agriculture, and was an intellectual. And you don't often hear that kind of slant on somebody. I was like, once again, we've got, FDR, who's sort of an interesting sort of character that you can't quite pin down. But certainly his wife was quite a loved and respected person. And then he's surrounded by this excellent Henry Wallace. And I thought, bad people don't surround themselves with good intention people. And so I started to, an idea started to emerge in my mind that maybe FDR was waging a kind of a cult war against the, whatever globalist forces that seem to, feed ideologies like capitalism and communism, and basically run us ragged as an experiment and learn a lot from us, how we respond to things. It just occurred to me that, maybe FDR was, by building the Pentagon, by commissioning a new dollar bill with all of that Masonic and Illuminati symbolism, that maybe he realized that his task in his life was to build America up. And, whatever my criticism of the United States, the intentions of the United States prior to the Second World War, you don't know that the American bankers are funding the Nazis. All the intentions are good, And I don't think FDR was in that Nazi sort of funding angle. So maybe he just realized, we've got sort of three ideologies here. We've got sort of American commerce, we've got German Nazism, and we've got communism, Stalin over in the USSR. And actually, all three are being controlled by the same group. But if one group must emerge victorious, it must be the freedom-loving, democratic, espousing, and commerce spreading the United States of America. Now, of course, we know that after the Second World War, straight away the Nazis were into the United States with Project Paperclip. But that's another story. For me, there's a nice little moment when FDR seems to be involved in an occult war. And then you started to talk about Nicholas Roerich and his association with Henry Wallace, who was vice president for the design of the dollar bill. And I was coming at it from a completely different angle. And I was like, wow, the synchronicity bell is ringing. I've got to get in touch with Robert. That's why we're talking today.
Well, it's a very interesting confluence. And FDR is either lionized or demonized in this country. There's really no sort of middle ground with him, because when we look at FDR, one of the offshoots of the New Deal was the birth of the corporation. Corporations were started. They were essentially founded so that they could be part of the New Deal and get funding. And then at the end of their usefulness, they would then be disbanded. Corporations were never meant to be these monolithic and titanic entities, or so that's what was said during that time. And then what happened was that because these corporations were started to build roads, build dams, build bridges, they continued to live on. So as a result of FDR's enthusiastic investment in the infrastructure of this country, he helped spawn, interestingly enough, the corporate beast. So while some people look at FDR as the sort of the socialist daemon that put America onto sort of the ultimate model of socialism, which is what Barack Obama is now implementing, putting in place as far as I can see, at the same time, he also gives birth to the rise of corporatism, either intentionally or unintentionally. So that adds yet another wrinkle to the strange legacy of FDR.
Yeah, there's loads of complexity there. And I'm even though I like sort of this, I mean, it's just a personality there. I think for this guy, he seems to be trying to do the right thing. But I think it's important not to be binary about many things in life. And that there seems to be some pluralism there, whereby, some decisions are made because of the context, some decisions are made because of the values, and some decisions are made, and maybe wrong decisions. So very difficult to tease apart what the hell and who the hell was FDR, And I don't like to say he was the greatest, but I don't like to say that he was, all bad. And, let's be candid, FDR used Pearl Harbor to drag America into the war.
That's right.
And additionally, something that's interesting from my sort of, looking at the UK is that FDR didn't like Winston Churchill one bit. And we now know that actually Winston Churchill was a snappy one-liner, dickhead, who was on the books for some shady sort of financiers and was basically pumping for war for England, the UK to go to, Britain to go to the war. And so, you've got an enormous amount of complexity there, Robert. I don't know the answer to it, but what I do know is that when people put down symbols, when they put down cards on the table, like the Pentagon and like the redesign of the dollar bill, I feel that those are, I almost trust symbolism more than words these days, which is the reverse of the mainstream media and mainstream media consumers.
Yeah. Well, so this is a good transition to Wallace. Wallace is sort of the architect behind the dollar, and behind Wallace is Nicholas Roerich, this very interesting and somewhat shady character in some ways. He's got his fingers into the best and brightest minds of Russia during the turn of the century, just after the turn of the century. He works on the Rite of Spring. He's almost the symbolic visionary, the ritualistic visionary behind the Rite of Spring, and he's teaming up with Igor Stravinsky, George Balanchine, Vasily Kandinsky, Nijinsky, the dancer. I mean, these are the who's who, the creme de la creme of Russian artistry, and they create the Rite of Spring, which is really a ritual for the entire 20th century. He then goes on to come to the United States, and he infiltrates very quickly into circles of power using this thing called the Centamani stone. This is the totem, the fetish that gets him into the circles of power. And the Centamani stone supposedly descended from the star Sirius via the crown that Lucifer wore when he came to Earth, cracked into a number of pieces, one of which is in the Kaaba in Mecca. So this stone is also akin to the Holy Grail. He's got a piece of the Holy Grail. So this gives him mystical entree into the likes of the lives of Henry Wallace. Now, put on top of that he's been to Tibet, he's a raging theosophist, and a very interesting intellectual who's teaming up with his wife, who's a trans-channel medium. This guy gets in very quickly and begins to shape the symbolic destiny of the United States through Henry Wallace.
There was some matched agenda there between Blavatsky and Nicholas Roerich. So, but was that coincidental, or was it actually the question that I want to ask you, Robert, that I'm sort of interested, that has been floating around in my head? Are certain times, certain times, like 100 years ago or the beginning of the 19th century, do you think they have a greater propensity towards energetic expressions like spiritualism or occult powers? I've got a feeling that that the Earth is not a static set of rules. That sometimes ages sort of are ushered in where spirits are talking and everyone jazz is jumping or whatever. I just got a feeling. I don't know. Is it coincidence that Blavatsky and Roerich were sort of emerging at the same time, or were they collaborating or conspiring?
Well, I think it's probably all of the above, to be honest with you. I mean, if you look back, there are certainly 100-year cycles of history that get played out in very apparent fashion. The 20th century, if you look at the number 20 in the major arcana, it is the Aeon card. And the Aeon card is the birth, it's the end of one age and the beginning of another, okay? This is where the 20th century comes into play. It is the Aeon, or the dawn of the new age. Now, occultists knew this, and they had been planning for the 20th century for quite some time. You also have, by the way, at that time, the Golden Dawn people that are represented by the poet Yeats, by A.E. Waite, who is the author of the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, and of course Aleister Crowley. So you have these personalities also emerging at the beginning of the 20th century. So none of this, I believe, is any coincidence based on the Aeon card. And now we're in the 21st century, so we've gone from the end of the beginning of the New Age, or the dawn of the New Age via the Aeon, into the actual New Age itself, which really began on 9/11. It's to a large extent on 9/11, 2001, and everything that we've been doing since then has been a mass acceleration of the whole concept of the dawn of the new day. If the 20th century was the dawn of the new day, right now we're about at high noon, or we're getting close. Maybe it's 11:11. So this is where we are now, so I think to answer your question, these things have a life of their own, and at the same time, there tends to be a fair amount of planning that goes into this. People take this stuff very seriously at high levels. I mean, there's a lot of money invested in these plans essentially manifesting. So I think that's where we are in terms of the time.
Yeah, for me, it's fascinating trying to project. Well, what does this mean in the next sort of five or so years? Certainly, we seem to be for me there's a feeling of compression going on. Not just time, but information density, and the kind of events that are taking place. Cyprus, for instance. The information warfare that we've touched upon slightly, it all seems to be sort of, I don't particularly like this idea of the singularity as a sort of as an experience, but as a sort of as a metaphor. Yeah, it sort of makes more sense to me.
Yeah, I often thought of the singularity as being like, we have these sort of end times, scenarios. It's the rapture, or it's the ascension, or it's the singularity, right? I mean, they're all kind of these macro accumulators of sort of collective energy, and I think that they're there for a reason, and I think what we're trying to, come to some kind of understanding of is our unity, our oneness.
Yeah.
And so each group has their own kind of set and defined definition and their own playbook and their own design. I mean, the singularity people are very real about what they're trying to do. I mean, they're trying to amp, synthetic sentience to the point where it surpasses humanity. They're invested in that, man. And the religious right are invested in their thing too, in a very big way. So these massive memes are getting empowered consistently by people that believe in them. But I think you're right about the singularity. It stands for something else. That's my take on it.
Yeah. But also, do you not see that there's a sort of, I'm fascinated by, for me, the idea of, I'm not into that sort of transhuman, techno-fetishism, singularity stuff. I'm into the idea of information condensing into a certain area. I sort of feel that there's an interesting paradox taking place at the moment, that the sex fetishists and the transhumanists, are basically seeing technology scour down all the shit in the human race that really is artificial construct. The separation of man as a collective consciousness, the acquisition of material things, the use of artificial systems such as synthetic money or fiat currencies. The internet seems to be scouring down, and it's taken down a few big ones, like advertising certainly has been affected hugely, and newspapers are being taken less and less seriously. But certainly, I do not feel, Robert, that this increasing transparency, and I would say emerging authenticity, is an interesting phenomenon to observe.
Well, that was one of the things you and I talked about a little bit on Friday when we were discussing these ideas offline, in how with the advent and the exposure of information, one could say that it would be a dehumanizing experience, but if you pay attention and you still have a few, cells in your heart that are remotely open, you'll see, thanks to the internet, that there's more suffering, more poverty, more injustice than we've ever known.
Well, okay, now I've said something different to that on other things. I should repeat it, Adam, which is that I don't see the internet as responsible for the dehumanizing effects of globalization. I can't quite sort of agree on that one. And here's why. Because for me, the idea that technology is always a good thing is a false claim, because what we have now on the planet is the greatest number of starving people ever.
Right.
Now, if that's the dividend of technology, clearly we don't know how to handle our technology. The first thing we need to do is go back to basics, understand who we are, what we're about, what we value, what we cherish, which bits of technology are worth keeping, and which bits of technology we really need to sort of find a way of sealing off. But when I look at the kind of technology that, and this is why I go into this, it's a paradox, because on the one hand, you've got the tech fetishists and the transhumanists who really love the internet, but actually, there's a feminine aspect to the internet, and there's a feminine aspect to transparency and information and sharing and all that kind of stuff that I think grinds down an awful lot of the tech fetish transhumanist ideals, which is that, I just sort of, the more I observe the internet in action, I don't think the internet's responsible for increased poverty. I think greedy people with artificial constructs using technology to distract people, yes, okay, fine. But maybe I'm wrong at that point, Robert. All I'm saying is I'm disagreeing, but I'm not saying that I'm right.
No, I agree with you. I think that there are some people that think that the internet has the capacity to dehumanize people, that relationships are virtual, that people don't really connect emotionally. I don't find that to be the case at all. I was out last night in Austin. I was at a restaurant, and there were a group of women at this restaurant. They were wearing little, hello badges, and I asked them, who are you guys and what are you doing? And they're a group of mothers that take photographs, and they're a part of a meetup group, and they all decided to meet up finally for the first time and do a kind of like a photo, quest throughout Austin, and then have dinner. I mean, to me, this is a really potent and galvanizing part of the internet. And I'm with you. I think it's a humanizing experience. And when we see news that theoretically should touch us, it does. Because what's happened is that the mainstream media has shied away from anything that has any kind of frontline effect. And the internet has brought that to us. So I think it's had this power to open us up emotionally.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
The meetup thing is it's interesting because you can even look at the internet as a way of there are people who sort of enjoy the idea of lurking online and or trolling through Facebook pages, whatever. That's not my thing, but I understand. I respect anonymity on the internet because of course there's great rewards from anonymity, like exposing corruption, and we do have a great deal of corruption at the core level. So, but I have to say, I agree with you on this, on the idea of moving from the online to the offline. It's easily one of the most magic experiences anyone can have, because to meet somebody in real life that you've never actually that you've met first online is a very empowering experience because it adds a dimensionality to a character that was never there before. It's a little bit like, one of the things that I do when I go jogging is that I've noticed that actually it's a really foolish thing to judge a character until I've heard a voice. You can change your mind instantly on somebody when you hear the way that they express themselves or talk. We make so many assumptions about it, but that whole online to offline transfer is one of the most empowering things that can happen, and I find that quite exciting. But wow, we are living in certainly in a time where. I don't know, if you're not paying attention, it all seems to be same old, but for me, it's not.
No, not at all. Not at all. The other thing, too, Charles, with the internet, like, for instance, with somebody like you who has your website, it used to be called Punk Plan, but I think it's charlesfrith.com now. What's your website?
Just Google the Punk Charles or Charles Frith. That'll find me.
Okay.
I lost my domain last year. That wasn't my place.
I remember that. I remember when that happened. That was a little weird, huh?
Oh, I posed somebody in the list, and they removed my domain from me. So in a way, I deserved it, but actually, it was worth it.
So you've got your website, and then you've got 3,000 followers on Twitter, which is amazing. And the reason you have all these followers is because you are consistently drilling these really amazing nuggets of news out there. You're like the new AP or the new Reuters. I mean, if you want to get up-to-the-moment news, people need to follow you. That's number one. But number two is that you have an opinion, you have a voice. I believe that you stand for something. And when you do these things, you have to be pretty legit. I mean, you've got to be able to walk your talk. You've got to be transparent. You've got to be authentic. So the internet, in a lot of ways, when you're doing something like what you're doing or what I'm doing, keeps you honest. Because if you don't, people will shred you. They won't listen to you. You will lose all credibility. And then what? Right?
Yes. It's interesting, Robert, you say that because my voice, I have to say, on the internet, particularly with Twitter, is striving to be as authentic and as harsh as possible. I think we live in an age of great deception. But I have to say that voice comes from making every mistake under the sun that anybody could possibly do. I used to read all the quality newspapers, broadsheets, The Economist, and I used to think that I was an educated and well-informed person. But actually, all I was doing was repeating what I was told. And then, over the last couple of years, the last 3 years, I've had this great awakening of realizing, oh my God, actually, it's a matrix, and I've had to swallow the bitter pill. But it's a wonderful experience in some respects, but it's a great burden sometimes, knowing, my God, the control matrix is really quite extensive. But then again, it's been going on for a few hundred years, if not a few millennia. I've only been walking on the planet so long, but I have made every single mistake possible. I've believed in the wrong people, I've believed in the wrong ideologues, the wrong ideologies, the wrong parties. I've said all the things that you possibly say that are wrong, and I still do it. But I like to think those are harder nuggets that I'm spitting out now. Because I'm not attacking the institutions and entities that I for no reason whatsoever. I would much rather that have a transparent and harmonic world. But until we recognise that there are certain problematic entities and constructs and synthetic ways of synthetic transactions or transactional methods, whether it's business or even human or tribal. But anyway, the bottom line is that I don't say what I say because I think I've got something to say. Everybody thinks they've got something to say. I say it because I think we should. I don't know where I want people to try and prove me wrong. Come on, show me something to prove that I'm wrong. But actually, I don't get too many people challenging my stuff. Although, paradoxically, this evening, I may have posted something about this anonymous hack that might not be as real as I hope. But if not, it's no big deal. It's online, and if anybody wants to comment on it, they can.
Well, that's that's really the kind of the shadow side too of all this information, is that we have to sift through what's real, what's timely. We all get sucked in sometimes. I had Alfred von Weber on my show, Alfred Weber.
Set up, right.
And he got sucked into these two characters from Russia who claimed they were from another planet and could live off of radiation. And he made a kind of a big deal out of it. And it was earlier that day that he was really kind of jamming this thing. And I had him on my show, and I asked him about it. Between the time he posted it and the time I had him on my show, he found out that they weren't what they seemed to be. So he had to actually do a public retraction on my show. I've had to do it. I remember there were these characters that went up to Idaho, and they had and they took over the prison, the little jail there for this town in Idaho, Montana. It was Montana that was cash-strapped. And I think that was a complete and utter piece of theater that sucked people in, thanks to Alex Jones. I think Alex Jones was actually behind that, by the way. And I was all up in arms about it, and it's like, oh, wow, well, maybe things aren't really how they appear to be. So I've become a lot more skeptical as a result and try to hold off on things. But at the same time, you want to get out there. You want to put it out there. You want people to know about it. So it's really a fine line.
We're learning faster. We might make mistakes, but we're learning a lot quicker. Some people believe in, this uranium couple or whatever. They can't launch that for 10 or 15 years in the old days. But with the internet, at least you can kind of, you might be into something and then realize, oops, maybe this isn't as authentic. So anyway, but there seems to be some sort of collective kind of hammering out of what's real and what's not real. And certainly, I think that there's one of the interesting sort of ideas that I've picked up from sort of whistleblowers from the army and the military and the Pentagon and stuff like that is the idea of manipulating collective reality, perceived reality. Is that a lot of the stuff that we agree is real as human beings, part of the human experience is only what we agree that is real, or we've been programmed to agree is real. And once you're on that road of, oh my God, do I think this because I've been programmed to think this, or do I think this because I've actually come to the conclusion that, whatever experience has whatever effect on me. So, I just think great to put the hand up now and again and make a mistake because, surely that's one of the expressions. Everybody says, make mistakes or fail quicker, fail harder. Very few people actually say, I fucked up there. And I certainly think, it may be today, this anonymous 404 thing with guards, whatever. That might not be as authentic as I post. But still, there's a lot of information being leaked on the net.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we've got about 15 to 20 minutes here, so let's try to blast through some stuff. Let's spend about 5 to 10 minutes going back to the Wallace piece, and then kind of wrapping that up, and then let's quickly get into Syria, and then also Cyprus. By the way, countries that are very close to one another in terms of geography, in terms of geopolitics. They are integral in terms of what's happening in that part of the world. So let's go back to quickly the Roerich and Wallace thing. Why don't you go ahead and sort of run it out a little bit?
For me, so we've got FDR, and he realizes there are three ideologies emerging on the planet, and correctly believes that the United States must at all costs win the next war. Now he's dialoguing with, he's talking to Churchill, who he doesn't trust at all, and he knows that the Japanese, basically America is provoking the Japanese to war by cutting off their oil supply, because that too could be another militarist kind of fascist kind of ideology emerging in the Asian Empire. So he's got a lot of big decisions to make, and they're dirty decisions, a lot of blood on FDR's hands. But, if you're born in the Kali Yuga, you've got to make Kali Yuga decisions. That's the way it goes. We chose this, didn't we? So I sort of think that, FDR's in a situation where he's got a bunch of values, a bunch of ideals, realizes that the planet's probably being manipulated anyway. But if it's being manipulated, it's really important that out of 3 or 4 contenders to usher in or to lead the century, it's America that's got to be in charge for its freedom of speech and all of those kinds of values. And at some point, he sort of realizes that he can deploy sort of ancient and occult sort of symbolism and powers. I figure that there's nothing to lose. But really, FDR is that some of the most visible symbols a country can execute, which is the defense building, the Pentagon, the entire pentagram, and the dollar bill with its pyramid and all-seeing eye and owl and Novo Seclorum.
Novo Order of Seclorum, yeah, the new order of the ages.
New order of the ages. So I just figured that whatever happens, history is always a dynamic, isn't it? It's always on the move. It's not, you might make a decision, but then that has a contextual effect on the next decision. So I figure that whatever happens to the United States with Germany losing the war but the Nazis winning it, I think that's another story. But certainly the intention of FDR at the beginning with his what I would call quite sort of righteous and admirable Vice President Henry Wallace is good. Their intentions are good. And straight after the war, you've got Henry Wallace being taken down in the Democrat convention with the lights being thrown very much into the Super Bowl experience. The lights went down. They postponed the Democratic convention vote for Wallace for 24 hours. The big Democrat military-industrial complex players came in, bribes, strong-arms, blackmails, all of the big Democrat boys, and Wallace lost the vote for the presidency after having a 60% lead. And they bring in this weasel, this Truman figure who's been, you can tell he's a weasel because history portrays him as being fundamentally decent. Well, no, that's not the score. That's just the way you tell things these days. Look what the mainstream media tells you, and you go in the opposite direction. Anyway, but, Truman is your classic sort of small-town Freemason. So he might have the books in his library, but he's not interested in it. And he's just not clever enough to actually sort of appreciate and embrace, energetic expressions other than power. And actually, Truman was a disaster for the United States because he oversaw the establishment of the National Security Act, and you've got CIA, the NSA, and all that good stuff. Basically, is Nazism-like.
Right. No, it's true, and it's true. And Truman also, we talked about this on Friday as well. Truman appointed Louis Brandeis to the Supreme Court. He was the first Jewish Supreme Court justice And there are people that believe that at that point in time, we actually moved to Noahide law with Brandeis being on the port. So it's a major coup, I believe, for the Rothschild group and its desires to get their tentacles into not just the POTUS, but SCOTUS as well. And Truman is the guy that oversees the Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project, as we also talked about on Friday, was the brainchild of, this is what I've read, whether you believe it or not, whether you want to go with it or not, but it was the brainchild of the Rothschilds, and it was through Bernard Baruch, who was the architect of the atomic bomb, running everything from his New York penthouse, which is why they called it the Manhattan Project. It was Bernard Baruch, who was the guy who was in charge, who'd hired Robert Oppenheimer to develop the bomb, and it was Truman who cold-bloodedly decided to drop the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, two places that had been left intact for this very purpose. And that's what we get with Truman. If we flip the script and we go back to Wallace, Wallace is a much different character. You know, he was born in Orient. I find this fascinating. He was born in Orient, Iowa. Orient, right? I mean, and what did this guy have? He had a penchant for Eastern religion. He was born in Orient. And he was born in the year 1888, 888, which to the Chinese is incredibly symbolic. You know, I mean, this guy was lined up. His mother was a teacher. She taught at the University of Iowa. And as a result, they actually brought in George Washington Carver, who was one of the great minds of the early 20th century. He made everything out of a peanut. And it's through Washington Carver, who stays at the Wallace House, where Henry Wallace becomes very involved in agriculture, which leads to his position as the Secretary of Agriculture. And he, at a young age, check this out, at a young age, he basically shows the entire agricultural industry that the robustness of corn has nothing to do with how it looks. And he does this through his own experiments in hybridization. So this guy, as a teenager, is like moving mountains already.
What do you mean robustness of corn? The actual stalk, or
he figured out that yield had nothing to do with appearance.
Yes.
That you could have a corn that may not be the prettiest looking corn, right? But it could be the most robust and yield the most bushels. So what he was favoring actually at that time with his work with hybridization was cross-splicing different corn genes in order to create new types of corn, which were actually stronger than the other types of corn that had been, mono-farmed or monocycled for a long period of time.
Wallace was the guy who understood that the basics are important, commerce and agriculture, to produce stuff that is better, and none of this Monsanto seedless, will exploit the Indian farmers kind of nonsense. This is a guy who understood where he could make a contribution. And, I've got to thank Oliver Stone on this one for bringing my attention to his skill set, which is, you couldn't ask for a better skill set, and then suddenly you've got Truman, as you say, sort of ushering in sort of Supreme Court influences that certainly aren't in the interests of the great United States of America. And just tapping into that point, Robert, I want to just share something that I've been, my greatest beliefs don't come about overnight. They're like little things I gnaw on for months and years. At first, I'm repulsed by them, and then I'm gradually sort of thinking, well, this stands up. Keep standing up. I can't knock down this idea. And one of the ideas that I've sort of come to appreciate is actually for real, and I've researched it today. It's quite extensively. It's actually that Victor Rothschild, who was working for MIT, was basically your international three-way spy. So he's divvying up all the information between the Soviets and the British, because the Soviets, the British, and the Americans were three separate entities at the end of the war. Even though the United Kingdom was broke and Churchill had his one last bash for the empire, but he actually came out of it a loser. which is why the British people rejected him and voted in Clement Attlee. You've got this MI6, it's quintessential. They train the SOS, the OSS guys, SOS. They train the OSS guys into the CIA. He's playing it three ways with the KGB. Basically, what's come out of my I know that there's collaboration between the major powers at a certain level. So you've got the sort of Averill Harriman, Prescott Bushes, your Yale, Skull and Bones crew and all that sort of thing, who create CIA and seem to run the CIA basically as a shadow government. But they seem to have these links. And so today I finally sort of had to conclude that the information of Victor Rothschild as a senior person in MI6 is basically running all the triple agents like Blunt and Philby and all that kind of stuff. And you just got to look at what happened at the end of the war. Suddenly you've got sort of equal distribution of biological, chemical, and nuclear warfare between the three powers, and everything gets split up so that there's no basically to keep man in conflict with man. That's the way I see it. So whoever's running this show, certainly the Rothschilds are in it at that time of the century. I don't know now who's in charge. That's the problem. We only get to learn this stuff subsequently. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I do, but I don't want to let this Rothschild thing go, because what's interesting is that if you go back in their history, they were very okay with funding whatever side of a conflict. So they didn't really have any skin in the game as to who won, because whoever won would be beholden to them anyway, right? So the information piece is akin to that. They'll trade information. Whoever gets the best of it will theoretically reward them as a result, which I find entirely fascinating. And that gets back to Roerich, because what happened with Henry Wallace, even before that Democratic convention, they were conspiring to take him down. And Wallace had a number of letters with Nicholas Roerich, where he was really singing Roerich's praises as a teacher and the spiritual destiny of the United States, the new Atlantis, which is what Roerich was touting. And those letters got out, and one of the people that got those letters was H.L. Mencken, who was a bulldog sort of fifth column journalist at that time, and they really went after Henry Wallace with these letters, and they basically proved Wallace, or tried to prove that Wallace was an airhead. And not only was he an airhead, but there was a chance that he could also be a Soviet sympathizer and all these other things. And what I came to realize, I don't have any real info on this, but I believe that it was Nicholas Roerich who sold those letters to the publishers of those papers so that their journalists could get them, because I think Roerich was a double spy. And one of the things that he did while he was pals with Wallace is he convinced Wallace that Joe Stalin was a good guy. And after, right around the time when Wallace was running for president, he recanted on his position around Stalin and began to view the Soviet Union with a great deal more suspicion than he had before. And one of the problems is that people were calling him a flipper or back flipper. I mean, things that, that we would ascribe to any normal politician today who would change their position on anything. And so now he's got a moral dilemma with the Soviet Union and his previous affectation towards Stalin. He's got these letters coming out, and then he's about to be taken down by Truman and the Rothschilds. It was really a bad endgame for Wallace.
Yeah. I've got to say, though, that, and this is not Stalin apologist, but just let's add a little context here. The U.S. Tsar was growing again. It just lost 20 million troops or whatever, and in no mood for actual expansionism. And so, you've got General Curtis LeMay whispering into JFK's ear, look, the Russians have got thousands of nuclear missiles, so we're going to have to, this is all, it's the constant synthetic terror. That's the constant sort of leitmotif of the power base. We've got to defend ourselves. National security. national security, and whenever I hear national security, I think to myself, bullshit. That's just, terrify people into saying, get the hell out of here, and then, come up with some synthetic terror later on to justify, you should have gone for it. I realize that Joe Stalin turned into a complete beast as well on his own people after the war, but there was certainly a period of time that I think FDR would have been the perfect guy to sort of smooth everything out and kind of work with Joe Stalin while edging out Churchill as he was done anyway, without actually getting into a ridiculous kind of Cold War. And we know that the Cold War was synthetic when, I don't know if you're familiar with Anthony Sutton, Professor Sutton's work.
Yeah.
Okay, so, once you look at Professor Sutton's work, which shows the technology transfer from the United States to the Soviet Union, basically, there were American troops fighting against the Vietnamese who were driving around in Ford trucks. Now,
right.
If there's a real war going on, you don't give the enemy the technology to make a truck that you can't build. There's no chance.
That started in Korea, Charles. That whole
Yeah, I can believe that.
And that we can look to, again, Truman. Not only did we give them technology or sell them technology at a very low price, but we also gave the Soviet Union thousands and thousands and thousands of bushels of wheat in order to keep them alive. I mean,
I've got to say about the Korean War, Robert, one of my greatest regrets about what history says about this. I think 3 million North Koreans Koreans were murdered. Basically bombed until there was no single building standing, certainly in North Korea. I think all of that was fake. It must have been fake. Because, why wouldn't you just nuke the joint? Why would you do it piecemeal? Why? Because there's money in it, right? It's cool, drag it all out. But, the Korean War, which is the silent and hidden war that so many people are unfamiliar with, to me was one of the last, you could argue Vietnam, but certainly it was a war where they got by slugging it out, for ideological reasons, and really not enough senior military men saying, this war is a joke. If we really wanted to win, then we would just drop the bomb on the...
Well, that's what MacArthur wanted to do. MacArthur wanted to do that. MacArthur and Patton are two very singular characters who both wanted to go beyond the rules of engagement and win the wars. Both of them were removed, and then one was killed, and then the other was demonized. So, to your point, you're right. And by the way, the Korean War was never ended. It is still an ongoing war. They never ended that war.
Yeah.
So, real quick with Roerich, and then we got to jump to just some current stuff. The thing that I think, and this is what I've been thinking about since you and I talked about this whole symbolic piece, is that if indeed Roerich was a double agent, and that he had decided to empower Wallace, who then would bring the symbols to Roosevelt, would he then be giving them the symbols that he would say would be the key to winning the war, but in actuality would be symbols that would ultimately, through their power and through the people that would follow their power, then wind up being something that would enslave the people. That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. I haven't considered that before, but certainly the evidence is there if you look at history, which is that we have these incredibly potent symbols being executed in a very dramatic and expensive manner, and really, in a way, becoming eventually representing almost the worst of the excesses of the United States, right up until 9/11, where you have the Twin Towers, and the Pentagon, both Masonic symbols, being taken out by the new consortium, and that's what happened here on 9/11.
Yeah.
Whoever the new consortium is, it'll probably be sort of Cheney, Rumsfeld, Mossad, or whatever. Who knows? But I do believe that there was a takedown of the old consortium and a state and the emergence of the new one. What are the symbols of the new consortium? That would be an interesting discussion, wouldn't it?
Well, I think the symbol of the new consortium is probably a combination of the star and the pyramid, which brings us into the Magen David or the Star of David. That's kind of how I see it. Let's quickly go into Assad. What have you heard? What have you heard about Assad in the last few hours?
Yeah, okay, I heard that he was by data. I heard he was taken out, and so it's very interesting to me because I've been criticising this guy since the 90s. You know, he lived in London when I was obviously a young urban professional in London in my late teens and 20s. And so I saw this guy, his father died, father was beaten, and so Assad moved back to Syria. And straight away I was like, well, give him a couple of years and hopefully he'll be able to sort of, kick off some change in the Middle East. Actually, he did nothing. And I hated him for it. It was like, you let me down. You have a Western education, you're a highly trained professional, and then you go back to Syria, and basically you do very, very little. So I've been criticizing this guy for a long time, but now that we know that the Arab Spring is basically the CIA Arab Spring, so they triggered it off in Tunisia. They paid for the groups to be chanting on the streets in Egypt and Cairo, and also Damascus and Libya. But it's all basically about consolidation of the Sunnis against the Shiites, even though that's a bit of a clusterfuck in Iraq, because George Bush had to get Iraq, so that's the post-Iraq. Anyway, bottom line is that you've got this a guy that I've never liked. I've been defending the sovereignty of the Syrian people against a NATO push for Iranian oil, and that's basically all it is. Iran is stronger with a strong Syria around it, so they've basically been bleeding Syria to death. And we know that MI6, the CIA, have been pumping guns and ammo with Qatari money and Saudi money into Syria right from the get-go. It's been the most disgusting corporate media portrayal of a revolution, when in actual fact corporate media hasn't got the balls to call out that it's us who are the animals in Syria. And actually, like Libya, we're suddenly aligned with Al-Qaeda and Nusra types, these jihadists who are 12th century beheaders. We are with the worst of the worst, as one famous reporter described Frith, his counterinsurgency tactics in Iraq. The worst of the worst. That's who we do business. Absolute nastiest torturers and beheaders and all that kind of stuff. So really, we're just full of shit. Western, Occidental, NATO models, pilot ships, sell a message in the mainstream media. Everybody goes, humanitarian love bomb, and off we go. We've done it in Libya, we've done it in Iraq, we've done it in Afghanistan, we're doing it in Syria. So I heard that Assad had been murdered, but it hasn't been confirmed yet to me. The reality is I'm not attached to the guy, but what I am attached to is sovereign Syria. We need sovereign Syria. We need sovereign North Korea. Because without these troublemakers who say, no, we don't want to partake in your corrupt and hologram money system, we haven't got a chance. If these countries fall, we're going to be chipped and basically allowed to eat, depending on whether the corporations want it. I mean, that's basically the control that they want.
I couldn't agree more. So then, who's left on the list if Syria falls?
But it's all getting a little bit messy now. So we've got Libya as we warned. We said, no, this is fake. This is not working. This is NATO trying to steal. Basically, NATO is printing money. Washington and London are printing money, and the rest of the world want to take the Mickey Mouse hologram money. So it's all getting a little bit complex. Generally speaking, everything's going reasonably well. So Libya was, there was a little bit of bickering there. Because Saudi was responsible for the Benghazi deal. But effectively, the strategy, the big idea from the NATO sort of demonic is that any problematic country must be broken down to as many conflicting Lebanese-style balkanization states, mini-states, whatever. So that as long as they're all, slugging it out, tribal warfare to last the next 100 years. Well, NATO can come along and extract the oil and the minerals and the uranium and all of that shit. Pay off the jihadist nutters that, frankly, are more interested in slugging out some kind of Sunni Shiite war than actually sort of progressing their pieces. So, where is it at the moment? We're, clusterfuck city, a bit of this and a bit of that.
Yeah. So then it's really about Iran at that point, isn't it?
It's Iran. So we've got, you're right, actually, I totally missed your question, which is that Iran is that one thing that British Petroleum described it openly as a big one. I mean, they're openly salivating on television. You know, of course, Iran is the big one. Yes, the big one because you're a greedy oil person. And, you know, it's also frustrating because, you know, one does, you know, a little bit of research into free energy. That's been clamped down by the oil companies. You know, the NSA goes in and shuts down any lab that provides an energy source that's 70% efficient. You know, so we know that it's all a Mickey Mouse game, but it looks like they're planning to use oil for the next for the next 100 years at least. And so they're sticking to that strategy. But, you know, once if we can get out of that loop, then there's a chance for us to start worrying about the next level problems, like, you know, how do you run a planet where everybody has air conditioning for free?
Right, exactly. All right, real quick, Cyprus, what's your immediate take right now?
Beautiful tactical selection by the powers that be. Not tactical, yeah, I suppose so, tactical to some extent. Syria's not going so well, but Cyprus is half Turkish and half Greek, so you've immediately got the essence of Islam and Christianity there, which is the same thing that's going on in Syria, and, you know, the pretense of NATO being behind democracy and against extremists, and when actually NATO is sponsoring, and it's a stick-up job, isn't it? You know, hey, we can make things spill over for you. We can make things really nasty. We could get Turkey. You know, Turkey's problem is that they have Syria on their doorstep. Originally, Turkey was proud to be on diplomatic terms with everybody, but it's turned on its former friend, Syria. And so they have a problem, which is that every time NATO wants to crack the whip on Turkey, they just say, oh, look, we've got the Turks, we've got the Kurds in Turkey who want to be independent, and also we've got this Kurdish region in Iraq. And we've got this pipeline that wants to run through from Iraq to Israel or whatever into the Mediterranean Sea. So why don't you just play ball, and we will give you lots of money, and we will keep the Kurdish problem at bay. So that's the big strategic game there, isn't it? And Cyprus suddenly brings in the whole financial equation. Basically, I mean, my sort of guess is that the European Union got the Nobel Peace Prize, and it's a pure conspiracy theory on my part, and I like it as well. It's a good one. They got the Nobel Peace Prize because if Europe wanted to tell the dollar to go fuck itself, then it would be global war, wouldn't it? But it didn't, and now it's being told what to do. So it's a sort of trade-off. You see what's going on, and we know that the euro is just as suspicious as the dollar because we have this financial system which creates nothing, which creates money out of nothing.
Right.
And until that falls, we're kidding ourselves. It's got to go. It's got to fall. I'm sorry if you've got savings in the bank and you make whatever. I don't know. I see, grow food, barter, trade, beg, steal, bar. We've got to break this. It's wrong. We're not put on this planet to be enslaved to some sort of, some system, synthetic system of money. There's different ways of tackling the problem. I don't know what the answer is. I don't have all the answers, but I do know what the answer is. And it isn't the model that we've got at the moment.
Charles, thank you for being on the show. Really appreciate everything that you are doing with your life and in terms of gathering information and also exploring yourself and your relationship to all of this at the same time. So thanks, Charles. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I've had a terrific time. As always, I get a lot out of what I learned from you too, so that's why I'm delighted to be on.
Charles Friith from Thailand, Punk Planning. Go find him. Follow him on Twitter. Okay, that was Charles Friith, who joined me earlier today, and it's a little staticky, but what do you expect? I mean, he's halfway around the world, and through the marvels of modern technology, we're able to sort this out and make it work. And hopefully you were able to get something out of it. There's a lot of information in there, and I will have Charles on again in the future, hopefully on a more regular basis, because he's like as I mentioned before, he's like an organic ticker tape. I mean, this guy just spews out really relevant tweets and content at a phenomenal rate. So please follow him on Twitter and follow him on his website. You'll get lots of really great information to sort through, and he's actually a really good dude too. So that was Charles Friith from from Thailand. We have 19 minutes left in the show. Interesting chats going on in the chat room. If you're not in the chat room and listening and taking part in that, you're missing a whole other experience. We're talking about orgone, yesterday being Wilhelm Reich's birthday, although the orgone conversation came up first. Synchronicities. Truth Nova was typing about the Truman Show as we were talking about Harry Truman. You know, there's some interesting collisions of reality, atoms of reality and surreality all colliding here at the same time. And there's also some really good kind of personal sharing going on in that place. So if you're listening to this podcast, you may want to listen to it live at some point, get in on the chat room and have some of that experience. It's very cool. Today, some interesting birthdays, time twins. Today's a birthday, or at least same day, different years. Anita Bryant and, oh God, I'm having a senior moment here. Anita Bryant, I'm going to pull it up, hold on. And Gloria Steinem. Anita Bryant and Gloria Steinem share the same birthday. I couldn't think of more two diametrically and dialectically opposed personalities and people than Anita Bryant and Gloria Steinem. And yet they share the same thing, which is an intense Aries-like dedication to what they believed in, which are two very different things, to be honest with you. And today would be the birthday of Howard Cosell, also known as the Mouth That Roared, one of my absolute favorite sports announcers, Howard Cosell. It's also Aretha Franklin's birthday, one of the great divas of modern American music. So a lot of really interesting Aries personalities. Yesterday it was Steve McQueen. It was his birthday, as well as the aforementioned Wilhelm Reich. Well, I think that just about does it for today's show. I want to thank Charles Friith once again for coming on, and I want to thank everybody else for listening. I'll be back on Wednesday with Navigating the Astrological Matrix, and hopefully Friday with a very compelling guest, which will grab your attention and make your world just a little bit better for giving up 90 to 120 minutes of your time. And with that, I bid you adieu. This is Robert Phoenix. You've been listening to the Monday Mashup. You know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible. And I'll see you on Wednesday with Navigating the Astrological Matrix. And here is our good friend of the show, in spirit, Philip K. Dick. Adios.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.